Hello and welcome to JoyNews, home of independent, fearless and credible journalism. This is News Desk with me, Bernice Abubedu Lansa. Shortly, we'll be crossing over to the University of Professional Studies here in Accra, where the One Ghana movement and the UPSA is holding a Constitution Day lecture. And it's on the theme, Realizing the 1992 Constitution Beyond Elections, Citizenship, Public Goods and Inclusive Governance. Let's take you now as moderator, Inshira Ado, who is head of strategic partnership and thought leadership here at the Multimedia Group, speaks to those gathered there.
And the advert that accompanied it went round. I was totally oblivious to what that meant and what it would hold for our future, which today is the democracy that we hoped for. But as with every project in life, you must pause to review how well or otherwise you've done as against the aspirations and the goals you set in the beginning. And that appraisal must be done as candidly as possible, devoid of any color or preconceived outcomes. That is the essence of our gathering this morning. And with that, I welcome all our viewers on the JoyNews channel, as well as our listeners on Joy 99.7 FM. We're happy to support the One Ghana movement and the UPSA Law School to start that review process of our own constitution. This morning's lecture is under the theme, Realizing the 92 Constitution Beyond Elections, Citizenship, Public Goods and Inclusive Governance. In the media landscape, the refrain has been loud and clear for quite a number of years that we vote and go to sleep and then come back 4 years later to do so. But the essence of our vote is to bring into material fruition the hopes and aspirations of the framers of the 1992 Constitution. And so we will be going through that lecture in a moment. You can follow the conversation on our social media handles. We're also live on Facebook and on YouTube. At this point, I would like to invite a board member of the One Ghana movement who works as a full-time country manager for Ghana and West Africa at Suntory Beverage and Food Africa, Middle East and the Caribbean, in the person of Mr. Mensa Senyaja. Let's welcome him with a round of applause to give us a welcome address.
Good morning, everybody, and Happy New Year. The staff of UPSA Law School, senior members of UPSA faculty, Mr. Geoffrey Gray, Director, Public Affairs Directorate of UPSA, Dr. Busakara Foster, Dr. Agre Dakwa, Chief Director, Parliamentary Affairs, representing the Honorable Minister, and then Nene Tete, who are the first for Sudoku traditional area. Distinguished guests here and present, my fellow citizens in here and those listening via the various media channels, the media partners, and all well-wishers. I wish to warmly welcome you all to the second edition of the One Ghana lecture series, a worthy collaboration between the One Ghana movement and the UPSA Law School. You're all welcome. I know that in these times, and then particularly on a day like this, Monday morning, it took a lot of pain to be here. But you chose to be here because of the relevance and importance of the subject matter. One Ghana Movement, as a social action organization, seeks to promote civic engagement with government and in the process enhance governance accountability, the rule of law, and human rights in general. Advocating the advancement of and the dignity of the individual and seeking to do this by holding government and relevant stakeholders accountable is key to our operations at the One Ghana Movement. To this end, projects such as Justice for June 3 campaign, the Right Way Initiative, the Ghana Action Series, and the One Ghana Lecture Series are organized to ensure that the objectives of the organization are met to the benefit of our beloved country, Ghana. The Fourth Republic, the most enduring democratic dispensation, is founded on the 1992 Constitution, a document which sets out our collective and individual rights and aspirations towards development. As is vital for every good project, a candid review is essential to enumerate progress made and outline lessons learned over the past years. Today's lecture, therefore, seeks to interrogate pertinent issues in the 1992 Constitution and help chart a way forward for our development as intended by its framers. As we continue to participate in these rich events, let us strive to journey towards promoting national interest over partisan interest or partisan politics, to uphold public policy accountability, and to encourage citizen responsibility in all our engagements. I encourage you all to participate when the forum is open for contributions, questioning, and discussions. And then I hope that we all leave here fully accomplished and setting the tone for good progress for our dear country, Ghana. Thank you very much for coming, and may we leave this place transformed and poised to do better for another Ghana. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Senyaja, for the welcome address. Mr. Senyaja is a board member of the One Ghana Movement. Without wasting any much time, I would like to quickly go through the introduction of our speaker, a man who I personally believe needs very little introduction, but as protocol requires, and for the chance of also introducing him to those who may not have heard or met him yet. He's currently the Dean of the UPSA Law School. Prior to his assumption of this post, he was then the Dean of the Gimpa Law School, a position he held for 6 years. As a practicing lawyer, he has 19 years of good standing at the bar and has played an active role in the administrative life of the Ghanaian bar. He's also held various public service positions, including serving on Constitutional Commission and consulting for government and intergovernmental agencies and bodies, including the IMF. In addition to the above, our speaker has served on a number of boards and advisory councils and played pivotal roles in shaping the policy direction of corporate entities in Ghana, including presently chairing the advisory board of the Chief Executive Officers Network of Ghana, a body comprising of CEOs of some of the largest and notable corporations in the country. He holds a Bachelor of Laws degree and a Barrister at Law certificate from the University of Ghana and the Ghana Law School, respectively. A Master of Laws degree from the prestigious Harvard Law School, and a doctoral degree in constitutional law from the University of Milan. He is equally widely consulted in academia and has been a visiting scholar and guest lecturer in leading European and American universities, including Oxford University in the United Kingdom, Fordham Law both in the United States and universities in Italy. Our speaker has written extensively in leading journals of law in the world in various areas of law, but largely concentrated in constitutional and corporate law. He's a member of charitable organizations and professional bodies, including the Ghana Bar Association and Rotary International. He's a fellow of the Institute of Directors of Ghana. He's happily married to Emily, who is here with us to support Lesson to All Men. And they have 2 children. Ladies and gentlemen, with a round of applause, let's welcome Dr. Kofi Abotsi.
Good morning. All distinguished protocols observed. I begin this lecture with a quote from the great American president, Abraham Lincoln, who, addressing the place of citizenship and limited government, rather aptly noted that we, the people, are the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who would pervert the Constitution. That this quote sets the tone for this lecture is clear and rather straightforward, for it addresses the role of the citizen in governance and the place of government relative to the Constitution. It is rather not unusual in the life of a country for it to experience a twilight moment in the governance history of that country. Something of a midlife crisis when it's a human being, when the follies of his own glory and the failings create moments of political depression. Ghana, like many countries, have relentlessly struggled in search of a system of government that best serves the people and delivers the goods of life to its citizens. One that ensures the practical responsibility of a government and its officials to the limits imposed by law. After suffering 4 debilitating coups d'etats, our country settled in 1992 on the current constitution in one final act of political and democratic experimentation. The fact that the constitution, unlike the 6-year duration of the 1960 constitution, or the barely 2-year experience of the 1979 constitution, has lasted almost 30 years, is a testament to the resolve of Ghanaians to see this project of constitutional government through, and to ensure that authoritarianism and undemocratic rule is barred forever. But the hopes of constitutional rule that greeted the adoption of the 1992 Constitution for some 29 years ago have dampened for some and seems to be fading for others. Many are those who already despair at the future in light of the failed promises of hopes and opportunities presented when we turned the history page in 1993. Of the United Kingdom, Sir Winston Churchill, democracy is the worst form of government except all the others that have been tried. This mindset and indeed approach to the pitfalls of democracy helps in not only looking at the gains of democracy in comparative terms, but also enables us to appreciate the history of authoritarianism and human suffering that have been perpetrated under the myriad of other government systems in the past. Having lived and led his country against the fascist and murderous regimes of Hitler and Mussolini, it is understandable that Churchill will view that with deep skepticism and suspicion other governance systems that seek to dislodge democracy. Regrettably, the changing fortunes of democracy in the world, with the rise of populist governments in Europe and elsewhere, may seem to have further deepened the distrust and doubts of many of the promise of democracy. Everywhere you turn these days, democracy appears to be in turmoil, and pressures on established institutions are mounting. Ghana, on the other hand, is experiencing a peculiar evolution. Having chosen the path of open and liberal and accountable system of government under the 92 Constitution, we embraced a system of government that placed power in the hands of the people, in which political leadership will be subservient to the electors and the electorates. For the opening words of the Constitution contained in the preamble, "We the people," sum up the ideals embedded in the Constitution, in which the framers intended that the Ghanaian people and nothing else will be at the pinnacle of things affecting government and governance. We the people constitute government and legitimize it by entrusting it with authority. We the people place limitations on government through the Constitution and should expect that accountability will be exacted for the exercise of power. We the people have stated our broad policy blueprints and preferences under Chapter 6 of the Constitution and our aspirations for a better future. We the people have established institutions to deliver public goods and shape the public administration of Ghana. These abiding words of the Constitution speak to a vision of government and outcomes intended by the framers of the Constitution, and the values which should legitimize and illuminate the path towards an intended glory. The fact that nearly 30 years ago, or the fact that nearly 30 years after its adoption, there has been failures to attain the core goals of constitutionalism and accountability, and of the delivery of critical public goods to the broader satisfaction of the Ghanaian people, speaks to deeper factors that go beyond the text and even spirit of the Constitution. Illustrating this view, Nana Dr. SKB Asante, the chairman of the committee of experts who drafted the Constitution, hinted that contrary to the position of the Supreme Court on the issue, it doesn't seem that the precedents who have come within the last 30 years have been limited by the constraints that have been placed on the powers of the office relative to the obligation to consult and to engage others and act on their advice. Like many others, he has therefore joined calls for the review and reform of the Constitution to promote constitutionalism. But is the Constitution really flawed? Or are the actors just good at elusive behavior that renders an otherwise functional document impotent in the face of exploitative application? With the heavyweights behind the calls being made for review, I dare say that the situation is vexed. But as will be repeatedly seen in this lecture, actor commitments and not perfect texts is what made the difference in constitutionalism. Indeed, Nana Dr. SKB Asante himself seemed to have recognized this reality when he stated rather emphatically in relation to Parliament's failure to exercise its oversight functions that the failure cannot be attributed to defects in the Constitution. Perfect texts can be abused or underused by officials with the wrong mission. The eroding confidence in democratic governance by many, arising from the increasing desperate standards of public life and corruption, minimal sense of nationhood and nationalism, the othering and exclusion of political opponents, actual or perceived, from access to public resources, and the general departure from the core values of the regime remain a major threat to the stability of our governance system established under the Constitution. Being honest with ourselves should lead us to the admission that the two leading parties, or the two major parties, which have alternated in leading this country, have not developed the spirit and ethos of constitutionalism in Ghana. If I ask for a politics that promotes constitutionalism and ethos of good governance, I am not oblivious of the fact that politics is about the preservation and advancement of interest, self-interest. But whereas the heedless pursuit of self-interest destroys a polity and weakens our collective resolve as a country, enlightened self-interest is the stuff that sustains the country. Whenever political self-interest dominates, clashes are inevitable, and the exploitation of selfish interest become the norm. The adoption of written constitutions in Africa have been said to be a part of the third wave of democratization on the continent. Seen for what it is, however, constitutional rule have been viewed as a higher system of governance in which power is invariably subordinated to ideal principles embodied in a written constitution. But the idea of constitutional rule has also been equally criticized. A written constitutional rule has also been criticized by those who think that we accord too much to a document which in fact is an act of human construction. But the idea of constitutional rule has also been equally criticized by those who think constitution, being what it is imperfect. The American founding father, Thomas Jefferson, famously criticizing the enduring nature of constitutions and their tendency to outlive generations, remarked, "The dead should not rule the living." Therefore, while universally embraced as the most superior form of governance ever devised by man, constitutional democracies have had some powerful critics, and I dare say that responses to these criticisms have been lame at best. For the fact is this: any transgenerational document that binds the future will remain hard to justify from a legitimacy standpoint, because after all, future generations should in principle have the right to enact their own documents, their own constitutions for themselves. To have, as the Constitution does, the 1992 Constitution, a document which imposes itself on future generations forever, simply because a constituent group in 1992 approved of it, is in theory difficult to support. But this criticism notwithstanding, constitutional democracies the world over have moved on and have marched. The theory or the criticism is moot, therefore. The past decades has, however, seen increasing calls for constitutional reform in Ghana, arising out of concerns over the failure of the Constitution to rein in the actions of officials and achieve the goals for which the specific provisions were adopted. But it bears pointing out that these calls may have provided a ready pretext to shift blame for the actual failing in constitutional development. Indeed, the bipartisan consensus on this subject resulted in the establishment, albeit by the then NDC government, of a commission to comprehensively investigate the need for review and to submit proposals for the review or reform of the Constitution. While I am not by any means of imagination suggesting that the Constitution is perfect and that it needs no change whatsoever, I argue that this subject and necessity of Constitution review has been overstated and indeed overblown, and the mechanisms of review have been exploited to explain failings which in fact remain attributable to the officials of state or the state itself. The fact that the architecture and complexity of our Constitution compares favorably with any standard or model constitution in the world makes the case for aggressive review of the Constitution even more counterintuitive. For all the calls of review, advocates of the Constitution review are indeed blinded to one dangerous prospect of any exercise in reform, and that is the fact that Constitution review itself can be used to water down liberties and enhance the powers of government, given that majorities who vote on these amendments do not necessarily adequately enlighten themselves in the changes being introduced. Again, the century-old wisdom of Abraham Lincoln speaks to the ages on this when he asserted that the Constitution is the only safeguard of our liberties, and that changing it can result in changing liberties. So while reviews may indeed be necessary to reflect the dynamics of human societies, too often the failings of constitutional governance do not arise from the internal imperfections of the structures and even the mores of the Constitution itself, as much as it is to factors external to the Constitution. For the reality of life is that human foresight is simply too short to deal with all the new developments of the future, and accordingly, the determining factor is not a perfect Constitution, which we will never attain, as much as it is the dynamic adaptation of the Constitution to the changing scenes of a country's life. So, if the Constitution is not the problem, what has been, or what could be the issue with constitutional governance in Ghana? The distorted application of various aspects of the Constitution has resulted in the application of what may be called a shadow constitution. Rules of the Constitution that may have been reinterpreted in ways that enhance executive and administrative power or undermine the very nature for which these rules were adopted in the first place. The shadow constitution may explain the reason Parliament is prepared to concede grounds in interpreting Article 108 to the executive and in the process weaken itself. It is the shadow constitution that gets Parliament illegally arrogating onto itself developmental functions and allocating monies to its members for projects, a function that is supposed to be reserved to district chief executives. The shadow constitution is alive whenever the constitution is interpreted by Parliament and the executive or other agencies in ways that depart from the original and purposive intent behind the provisions of the Constitution. Given that the shadow constitution is what gets, in fact, implemented and not the real constitution usually, this constitution and not the actual document is effective and overriding, regrettably. The risk and danger of implementing a shadow constitution lies, among others, in the fact that the interests, trade-offs, and compromises that are contained in the fold of the Constitution become trumped in favor of the entrenched but often self-serving preferences of political and constitutional actors implementing the shadow constitution. This has resulted in a situation in our country in which we have come to experience constitutional development without constitutional growth. This conclusion will strike many as odd. For after all, we are the country that has done well with establishing constitutional bodies, built a modicum of constitutional culture, run many elections, and have had stable changeovers of government. We have been touted as having led the rule of law enterprise in Africa and in the sub-region, and generally excelled where other countries have floundered. Yet, as I will argue in this lecture, growth entails more than a semblance of compliance with constitutionalist culture or demands. Growth entails realizing the values and aspirations of the Constitution beyond the text and superficial actions demanded by the Constitution. For textual compliance or compliance with the text by actors or officials have been optimal since the coming into force of the Constitution. But substantively speaking, this is really tokenism. Indeed, it is the frustration with the textual dynamics that have led to calls for changes in the text in the first place. The problem has never generally been the text. For as every constitutional law student knows, the text is dead until life is breathed into it through implementation. The well-respected jurist Oliver Wendell Holmes says it best when he argues that the life of the law is not logic, but experience. Far from being the text thus, the problem has been the exploitative abuse of the Constitution. Indeed, given that there are permanent texts in the Constitution which cannot be changed, even through reforms, and this point is important to note, because the transitional provisions contain indemnity clauses, and these can't be changed. The tendency to overemphasize development through reforms become clearly problematic in this vein. Changing the text through reform will be a futile exercise in the absence of commitment on the part of the political class to fully implement the text and the ideals inspiring the text. For human ingenuity, as I've said earlier, is always ahead of the law. The fact that ours have become a highly divided country has resulted in elections becoming perhaps the main indicia for constitutional governance in Ghana. From election to election, we seem to have become obsessed with the phenomenon and have essentially reduced constitutional governance to that exercise. So, for example, core government policies have become the subject of political spat between the parties, thrust into the vortex of electoral politicking within the intervening period from one election to the other. Elections have come to distort government policies, and these policies have had to yield to the pressures of politics. Elections can be a barometer for gauging public preferences on given subjects on policy of government. But as has been shown in our experience, elections can become problematic and indeed serve as the very obstacle to real and sustainable development. It is clear from the Constitution that the framers intended that elections serve three key functions of enabling the exercise of the right of choice by the electorate when electorate candidates present themselves for election to public office. In the same vein, therefore, election can be an avenue for accountability and ensuring that constitutional trusteeship is maintained. That public office is an avenue for service in respect of which there can be and must be accountability. And finally, elections under the Constitution provide a means for participation by the citizens in the life of the Republic. So conceived, elections constitute a means of reinforcing the sense of ownership by the electorates. Elevating elections to the center and dislodging the order of things that treat elections as an end character or the make of the machine. I argue that the Constitution, the machine, is fundamentally designed to help attain the delivery of public goods and help provide the environment and nurturing for the attainment of private enterprise and liberty. Like many aspects of the Constitution, the provision of public goods has barely improved within the last 29 years. According to one definition, public goods are commodities or services which are made available to all and paid for by the state, secured through taxation. Examples of public goods are law enforcement and policing, national defense and security, and of course the rule of law. At the micro level, public goods include education, water, roads, general infrastructure, and so on. The provision of public goods within the constitutional framework eases the impact of inequality and ensures the cross-fertilization of services, the cross-subsidization of services for all. In respect of the provision of public goods, the Constitution establishes a dual structure in which institutions like the Ghana Police Service, the Ghana Armed Forces, and SHRAJ are directly tasked with the mandate of providing political thuggery and the use of illegal violence during and in between elections. Having clearly failed to agree on common premises for running our country, the ensuing heated political debates have become marked by citizen political vigilantism, a veritable corruption of his role as a defender of the Constitution and, for that matter, the protector of the realm. In his new role, as he sees it, the citizen is taught to love his party beyond his fidelity to the state. He is socialized to prize his sectional affiliation over and above the Commonwealth of Ghana. The citizen has come to mean a group of citizenship has come to mean group solidarity signified by the party. When his party is in government, it is the moment of opportunity for the members of the party and for the citizen who is a member to maximize the benefits of party membership. For this is seen as returns on investment for supporting the party and being a member. When out of government and in opposition, the citizen member deems it an obligation to support the efforts of his party against the establishment through fair and foul means for the ultimate and selfish goal of party preservation. While some will pin this miserable state of affairs to the absence of deep and critical thinking in our public life relative to politicking and policy. It is a truism that a country which largely has rampant poverty, the citizen is easy picking for political actors desirous of winning election and also maximizing political power at all costs. In other words, it is virtually axiomatic to assert that power being the name of the game, politicians will leverage on every available tool to win elections or entrench themselves when in it. Therefore, while the concept of citizenship, as constructed by the Constitution as a repository of power, the transition between constitutional guarantees and actual manifestations and enjoyment thereof can be tenuous. The reality has been shown that the average citizen is weak and exploited in the face of mobilized political power, left adrift in the chaos of the raucous political environment and almost confused as far as his civic duties are concerned. Within the last 30 years, this dynamic has witnessed the effective marginalization of the citizen from mainstream government, not to mention the politicization of his contributions whenever offered. As earlier mentioned, a rather drastic side effect of this has been the perpetual electioneering cycle thrust upon us, arising from the constant politicization of all things national in our public discourse. From diplomacy to the economy, all issues affecting the national development is fair game for politics and political division. And the purveyors and fixers of this agenda of division and rancor has unfortunately been the citizen. The problem with the citizen leading the charge of what I call corrosive politics does not lie so much in the exercise of the citizen's right of dissent, difference, and indeed preference for alternative government and policies as it is for his uncritical support for a group even against the ideals of the state. It is this kind of loyalty that gets the citizen calling and threatening journalists who do not disseminate favorable information or opinion. It is this kind of politics that survives on loyalty and patronage and eschews dissent. It is the politics of the other, in which all groups which do not subscribe to the vision and actions of the citizens group are not only discounted, but also attacked, literally. This version of politics is not centric, and there is no place for the state. And all who profess fidelity to the state are looked upon with suspicion by party faithfuls. Division is considered virtue, and proclaimed non-aligned nationalism is scorned and sometimes comes with a heavy price. Until and unless the problem of dormant citizenship is resolved, our constitutional democracy will remain. For if the whole cannot be greater than its parts as universally agreed in mathematics, then the malady of citizenship will surely be transferred to the larger entity, which is the state. The citizen must therefore seize control of his constitutional destiny. He must recognize the plain but painful truth in reality that in this fray the game is zero-sum, in which bystanding is not rewarded but comes at a heavy price. The citizen who is duty-bound to defend the Constitution is by parity of reasoning empowered to participate in the governance of Ghana. When in 2017, the president, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, was inaugurated, he charged Ghanaians to become citizens and not spectators. I personally took that as a clarion call for active citizenship. The citizen who defends the Constitution and strives to uphold its central tenets. The citizen with an active sense of duty. A patriot in tune with the hopes and values of his country. A citizen who cherishes and prizes the national over the sectional. Experience since 2017 does little to convince me that he has been satisfied in this call. In other words, I doubt if the president has been happy since 2017 as to how Ghanaians may have taken that clarion call to citizenship. I proceed to address you on inclusive governance. An unfortunate byproduct of elections in Ghana has been regimes which exclude all others not deemed members of the winning political party. Under this system, political parties have been seen, or political parties have been seen as seen elections as signaling a moment of opportunity for the exercise of power and the distribution of resources to party faithfuls and loyalists. Under this practice, political opponents, perceived or actual, are deliberately excluded from the governance process and deprived of public resources in some cases. Regrettably, events characterizing the negotiating process of the 1992 Constitution and election thereafter set a tone and tempo of political division that have come to characterize our politics till this day. This phenomenon, which is known as the winner takes all, a practice I dare say may have been rather bandied around confusingly, has become very problematic. So at this stage, I will set out a multi-layered operational definition of inclusive governance, and in the process, hopefully clarify the nature and practice of winner takes all. First, inclusive governance for this purpose is captured as governance that embraces divergent groups and actors. At this level, inclusive governance is one in which deliberate efforts are made to share and distribute power among persons and groups who do not all subscribe to the same political party or ideology. It is the antithesis of winner takes all, whose modus operandi is the exclusion of all other persons or groups in the exercise of political power and distribution of national resources and terminological reasons may be called third parties. Meritocratic inclusivity promotes qualitative governance and enables all shades of competencies to be brought on board the government. This indeed is an ideal which, while it challenges the view of many about the essence of party political governance, advances the value of good governance. Third, inclusive governance focuses on the broad-based consultation and inclusion of identifiable political interests with a view to ensuring that policies reflect the variety and complexity of interests going beyond the party. This dynamic of inclusive governance seeks to deal with a core deficit of the winner-takes-all phenomenon in which only the ruling party or group are worthy of consideration. If the effect of policies of states are generally felt by all, then there is both a moral and pragmatic basis for consulting all who are affected. It is significant to state that the complexity and problematic dimensions of the practice have been worsened by its expansive scale. Laws like the Presidential Transitions Act and practices intended to cure a particular problem may unwittingly have expanded the scope of the practice of winner takes all by including public corporations and boards and entities, all of which stand dissolved at the end of every election. In a paper I presented to the IEA some 6 years ago at the request of that entity, I stressed that the practice of winner takes all is perhaps the most dangerous threat to our constitutional stability, given the heightened cost it introduces to politics. In other words, where citizens feel threatened, resource allocation or contracting simply by changes in government, resort to violence become inevitable. The increasing incidence and intensity of electoral conflict may just be a reflection of the growing frustration with the practice and the use in our politics. In other words, if elections become the reason people get unemployed, if elections become the basis for people losing contracts, people cannot look beyond elections in full life, then election ceases to become a civic duty, it becomes a matter of life and death indeed. There is therefore a practical basis to doing away with the winner-takes-all model of governance, and I say without being naive about the pressure who will fight tooth and nail to maintain and protect their privilege of being in government. I urge and virtually plead for doing away with the practice, not out of a sense of ivory tower, which academics are usually accused of, but inspired by the significant deficit of continuing to promote a winner-takes-all system of governance. The stakes through inclusive governance is a strategic way of reducing the cost, thereby the threatened instability of Ghana's governance in general. The issue with winner-takes-all is further complicated by the rather dysfunctional preference for majoritarian rule. This system of governance, or lex majoris, has thrived in Ghana given the lack of consensus from which broad policy blueprints can spring. Majoritarian rule tends to, in practice, equate the might of majorities to right. And this typifies the definition of justice by Thrasymachus in his dialogue in Plato's Republic, basically that justice is the interest of the strong. Majorities have tended to exploit their power without appealing to the moral qualms, moderating the exercise of power. It has virtually been the norm in Parliament. The majority can have their say, as the minority bid to have their way. Majoritarian rule deprives the country of quality as arguments win nothing, but loses all grounds to majorities in their preferences. Majoritarian rule also destroys any chance of compromises and the preservation and protection of the interests of minorities. It is arguable that if the Constitution is based on majoritarian principles, then the decisions of the majority should fundamentally be good. After all, there should surely be wisdom in numbers. From a practical standpoint, however, heedless majoritarianism flies in the face of certain logic, given that majorities don't have to be persuasive at all. They do not have to worry about the strength of their arguments or the cogency of their actions. They simply have to count numbers, and in the end, it is all well for them. In this regard, majoritarianism undermines the marketplace of ideas theory, and in the end, it is numbers, ideas that carries the day. But majoritarianism deprives us not only in governance, but also positions on things that require us and unanimity. For example, a failure of bipartisanship on key issues on foreign policy presupposes that the international system is in a kind of flux, and that reflects our domestic politics. The truth is, our national enemies change simply because our governments have changed. National interest globally does simply because our government has changed. We are either strong or weak together internationally, and the fact that we have a particular government in power doesn't change or shouldn't change Ghana's foreign policy. That logic requires that when it comes to Ghana's foreign policy, for example, there should be unanimity. Unfortunately, on all things that requires a majority decision, the majority will simply have their way, as the minority complains. Many will find it both true and disturbing, the fact that Parliament is the leader in promoting a practice of winner-takes-all in Ghana's governance. Parliament's obsession with numbers stems from the institution's desire not so much to assert its independence more than it is its willingness to do business or obstruct the executive, depending on which party secures the majority in Parliament after elections. The ongoing heated attempts by both parties currently to lead the House is largely born out of a desire to exploit the powers of the institution to its benefit from the standpoint of the majority. Should the ruling party secure the majority in Parliament, government will anticipate a free ride in its business with the institution, if history is anything to go by. And should the opposition party gain the most seats in Parliament, the government can expect frustrating obstructions. In short, Parliament has become a tool for the pleasure or pain of the executive, and its core functional purpose has been lost on all of us. Parliament's preference for majoritarianism has fragmented the institution for so long, and the conventional explanation that back-channel dealings by MPs is the linchpin of their work affords little assurance to a skeptical public who have come to view Parliament with growing doubt and even suspicion. The bright lines drawn between the parties on key issues of government policy presented to the House for approval crowds out objectivity, and this principle reinforces the essence of might being right. The Supreme Court. In establishing a framework of government that ensures against majoritarian tyranny, the framers created a Supreme Court with the jurisdiction and authority to handle with finality contested matters affecting the Constitution. Given the highly politically charged nature of constitutional cases, the Supreme Court is clearly a policy chamber whose work as a court is expected to be tempered by consideration of constitutional policy impacting its decisions. As an institution, it is perhaps the most enduring of the lot. Perhaps it is because they follow the words of what Alexander Bickel calls the ways of the scholar. Unlike the more political branches of the executive and parliament, the judiciary is a professionalized body that is structured to be insulated from the pressures of politics. Throughout its life, the Supreme Court has handed down some important decisions that have helped shape the life of the constitutional democracy established under the 92 Constitution. Decisions affecting the legal efficacy of the directive principles of state policy in the case of SIBA, determining the boundaries of executive authority in lawmaking in the case of 31st December, public financial oversight in public financial administration in the case of Occupy Ghana, and the role of Parliament in executive appointments in the case of J.H. Mensah are but a few notable decisions the Supreme Court has handed over to Ghanaians over the years. While not the subject of this lecture, we are living witnesses to the pending petition before the court challenging the result and the outcome of the recently held general election. Significantly, this is the second time in a decade the court is being called upon to decide the question of who the lawful winner, if any, of a general presidential election is. This is a matter, as lawyers will say, which is sub judice, on which I do not intend to comment. The importance of a court such as ours exercising the fundamental constitutional power of adjudicating. Notwithstanding, this jurisdiction has not been without its critics. Indeed, once again, Abraham Lincoln says it best when he cautioned that a candid citizen must confess that if the policy of the government on vital questions affecting the whole people is to be irrevocably fixed by decisions of the Supreme Court, the people will have ceased to be their leaders and practically resigned their government to the eminent tribunal. Issues affecting judicial review has always been controversial. Luckily for us in Ghana, the issue is settled in law, and the legal authority of the Supreme Court to make binding pronouncement is accepted without question. Article 1(2) of the Constitution states it clearly. From a general standpoint, however, our Supreme Court, like similar bodies elsewhere, is intended to balance the operation of the Constitution against key fault lines through the power of interpretation. Some of these fault lines in our Constitution include majoritarian extremisms, institutional appropriation of key constitutional bodies, including Parliament, as well as advancing the policy of the Constitution through the directive principles of state policy. In this vein, the court sits at the pinnacle of resolving contested governance issues, and beyond the court, there is no further appeal. The court has accordingly come to be thrust in the fray of hotly contested politics. With all the exceptional competencies of the justices who have manned the courts over the years, not even the Supreme Court can steer us out of the problems of our constitutional developmental challenges. The famous American judge, Learned Hand, the name Learned is a name, was more blunt when he stated, "This much I think I do know, that a society so riven that the spirit of moderation is gone, no court can save. That a society where that spirit flourishes, no court needs save. That a society which evades its responsibility by thrusting upon the courts the nurture of that spirit will in the end perish. The importance of Supreme Court cannot be denied, nor understated in this lecture. The process of building an enduring constitutional culture and ethos inspired by time-tested work requires work and a tradition of bipartisan consensus. Litigation destroys that consensus and only creates superficial resolution devoid of universal commitment. Our situation demands all hands on deck. The commitment of all hands on all sides and the sustained efforts directed at ensuring that the values and principles that animate the Constitution are respected and upheld are followed. In light of the things said above about the need to develop the Constitution through practice and not rapid reforms, I plead the courts, and indeed the justices of the court, to adopt a more friendly approach to constitutional litigation. Mindful of the enormous progress made by the court to relax constitutional litigation over the years, including the move away from the award of cost in constitutional litigation, I would ask for more and pray the court to sustain and speed up reform in this vein. Being the terminal chamber beyond which no further appeal is possible, the court can perhaps become more or become pro-substantive in its jurisprudence. The epistolary process adopted in such jurisdictions as India enables easy access to the court, and the policy enables easy access to the court, and the policy of the Indian Supreme Court to substantially discount the impact of procedural rules in constitutional litigation can be replicated in ours. Indeed, under the epistolary process, a simple letter written to the Indian Supreme Court can invoke its jurisdiction. Again, I say this mindful of the fact that the court operates within a constitutional context, and that context itself can be limiting. And so the fact that you initiate a particular constitutional process in a particular way is one which is indicated in the Constitution, and the court has to respect that. Nonetheless, the Supreme Court exercises inherent jurisdiction in many ways to minimize the impact of some of these procedural difficulties so that the civic mandate of the citizen can be activated through constitutional litigation whenever necessary and justified. The Ghanaian Supreme Court has demonstrated its capacity in this vein through such decisions as its expansive definition of who a person is for the purposes of standing in constitutional cases. The court clearly has demonstrated not only a capacity, but a resolve. I plead for more and the quickening of that pace. I speak to you finally on the spirit of the Constitution. Constitutions the world over are deemed special documents. Special because they are not merely legal documents. In fact, the enacting process, power dynamics, trade-offs, and concessions, and the many historical factors shaping and affecting their adoption, invariably makes constitutions a unique or sanctimonious document. It is comparable, as lawyers will say, only to itself, a document sui generis. Our 1992 Constitution claims that specialty of place, and in addition to the document describing itself as supreme, the Constitution is a document with a spirit. The Constitution itself mentions its spirit. The Constitution describing itself as supreme and the spirit of the Constitution animating the document and providing true meaning to the letter implies that the Constitution must be respected not only in its text, but also in its spirit. The spirit of the Constitution has been described as elastic, unknown by some people, and perhaps unknowable. But that is a far cry from denying its existence, as a former Chief Justice in Ghana, Justice Archer, once tried to do in the famous case of Salah and also 31st December. While obviously humbled by the enormity of the task of defining the spirit, which I'm not sure I can, I shall say at this stage, for the purposes of this lecture, that the spirit is the policy underbelly of the letter. It is the intent of the letter, the veritable philosophy informing the operation of the letter. From a functional standpoint, thus, the spirit controls the letter. The spirit is the policy of the letter. A failure of the spirit and a triumph of the letter is itself an abuse of the Constitution. A true commitment to constitutionalism can only be achieved if there is fidelity to the spirit in a manner that sees institutions and actors force themselves under the discipline of its restraint. Yet I dare say that while the spirit is the only true and sustainable means to ensuring an enduring constitutional framework, this is the most problematic aspect of the Constitution's operation. It is far too common to have actors boast of having complied with the letter of the law. Damn what the spirit of the Constitution thinks. We will not make progress with our constitutional development unless we overcome the deficit of the spirit. Parliament's continued failure to allow or promote private members' bill with its narrow interpretation of Article 108, its failure to take intimations from other branches, including the judiciary, and pass appropriate laws, including legislations on international commercial transactions, coupled with the continuing controversies between the two leading parties as to the acceptable size of government, per the number of ministers appointed, remain telling on the approach to the spirit of the Constitution in governance. There is a reason constitutions are said to be living. Constitutions live because they define things for all eternity. Constitutions live because the people who enacted the Constitution are all likely to be dead and gone some years from now, and the people who will be bound by the Constitution took no part in its adoption. Constitutions live because they are supposed to have the foresight of prophets and are able to see into the future way beyond any human foresight. And by reason of that, constitutions are impressed with certain spiritual quality. If therefore constitutions are reduced to text, constitutions would have ceased to have that fundamental quality that makes them constitution. One that separates them from ordinary statutes, and one that makes them unique and special. There is a reason constitutions are considered this special. Otherwise, constitutions cannot solve the emerging and unforeseen problems of our time and our society. Applying the Constitution mechanically, as we often have, can only lead to stagnation and retrogression. The Spirit provides the prism for dealing with emerging problems and for planning beyond our generation. Focusing on the text and not the spirit reduces the Constitution to the quality of a common statute, bereft of the sanctity and the position or place it should have as a law. As I conclude, I will say that we have come a long way, but we have an even greater distance to go. We have endured division. We have seen corruption in our public life, at least if public perception is anything to go by. We have endured want. We have endured a scourge of excluding large numbers of our own from governance. Yet we stand as a country. We stand under the banner of a constitution which is perfect in many ways, and whose imperfections are often intended to be improved upon by the practice and experience of time. This is perhaps the time to reiterate the time-tested quotation of Oliver Wendell Holmes again, that the life of the law is not logic, but experience. The reason the life of the law is experience is because the law is constantly behind human experiences. The law must constantly catch up. And as the law plays catch up, the law learns along the way. And the reality is human complexity demands way more than any draftman can possibly contemplate. The life of our Constitution, therefore, cannot be the text. It can only be experience. And that experience depends on the quality of the commitment. For in truth, there is never going to be a perfect Constitution. Perfection in constitutional law comes with experience, and the character of that experience determines the kind of progress that we make. The events of the recent election speak to a country in need of soul searching. As our politicians do the usual post-election ritual and political ping-pong, the usual problems confronting our people persist. The Constitution has been designed as a document to deliver critical public goods and promote the progress and happiness of all. Division born of politics and exclusion from governance only fosters animosity and fractures the democratic spirit. Rather than see the space of discretion contained in the Constitution as empowering actors towards taking decisions that promote sectional or parochial interests, I urge a new era of constitutionalism in which self-imposed restraint will become the defining feature for the exercise of power, and one in which the spirit of the Constitution ceases to be a back-end consideration, but fundamentally informs decisions and actions taken under the Constitution. In other words, if the spirit is respected, we will probably never need any change to the Constitution. If the spirit is respected, the text can be manipulated in different directions that attains the core goals. It is the tendency to be overly textual, ignoring the spirit, that appears to be giving us constant problems. What I'm pleading for here is the triumph of constitutional policy contained mainly in the directive principles of state policy and given a foundation in the spirit that I ask for, rather than a constitution review by way of textual changes. I am not suggesting, however, that one or two tinkering with the Constitution, particularly through the work, for instance, of the Constitution Review Commission and others, could be looked at. That is not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is that our obsession with changes in the Constitution is overstated. And therefore, even the changes that we expect to be introduced in the future, if they do get introduced actually, will become late or belated by reason of time, simply because human innovation and the tendency to manipulate would have restarted all over again. And so in the absence of ACTA commitment, in the absence of commitment of officials of state, constitutional changes will have very little impact, if any at all. This lecture, therefore, departs from recommending structural and substantive changes to be made to the Constitution, as this has well been flogged in many writings and papers presented over the years by many learned folks. The lecture recommends ACTA behavior changes and attitudinal changes, and that is the one big missing part of our constitutional practice. It is one dark spot on which hopefully I have shed some light. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Kofi Abotsi. We have been joined by a few individuals that I would like to acknowledge at this point. From the Australian Embassy, Madame Mercy Ajabeng. Thank you very much for joining us. And also the Mr. Francis Opai Tete is from the Council for Gadangbe Divisional Chiefs. Thank you also for joining us. Now, I'm going to introduce at this point, I did skip that earlier. I'd like to introduce our chairperson or chairman for the lecture and proceed to invite him to join us for a quick remark and a conversation with Dr. Abotsi here on the podium. Now, our chairman is in the person of Elikem Nutifafa Kwenye here. He's an entrepreneur, a business lawyer focused on African inward-bound foreign direct investment. He's been admitted to the role of lawyers, both here in Ghana and England and Wales. And noted for starting Oxford and Beaumont solicitors with just $5,000 seed capital and growing it to becoming a globally recognized law firm. In 2015, he initiated jointly and implemented the first fully integrated Pan-African law firm merger with ENS Africa Incorporated, Africa's largest firm. Now, to the surprise of many, including myself, in November 2020, Mr. Kwenye exited ENS Africa entirely to pursue other interests. In doing so, he's resigned as director of ENS Africa and also the executive chairman of ENS Africa Incorporated, and no longer has any association whatsoever with ENS Africa Incorporated or any of his entities. He's a lover of art, and he expresses that through the Kwenye Hair Trust for Contemporary Art, supporting young visual artists across Africa, West Africa mainly. Along with his sisters, he's also the co-founder of the Ikwa Kwenye Hair Foundation, which arms bright, underprivileged girls with holistic education and inspiration. He's on the governing of State Interest and Governance Authority, a nominee of President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo. Other current directorships include Sentinel Asset and Investment Management, Luno Money, and Serenity Homes. His many other accolades includes being one of the Forbes listed West Africa Young Business Leader of the Year. That was in 2012. He was also drafted into the World Economic Forum Young Global Leadership Program in 2010. Goes on and on. For the rest, you can always contact Google. Ladies and gentlemen, our chairman, Elikem Nukutifafa Kwenye here.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I must say I was quite disappointed in the applause. So please applaud me. Senior staff of UPSA, staff of UPSA Law School, Dr. Agri Dako, Dr. Abu Sakara Foster, Nene Tete Kuro, forgive my pronunciation, Kuro, faculty and students of UPSA, friends and foes of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, here present and listening on watching on JoyNews and listening on Joy 99.7 FM. Nime name, dadawo, mamawo. Thank you for the rare privilege to share this occasion today. I'm confident that you, or at least the vast majority, would agree with me that Dr. Abotsi's lecture and reflections on our 1992 Constitution was not only insightful, it was packed with so many questions and meanings that should stimulate, and I respectfully request that it actually does stimulate a wider national debate to ensure we unpack the themes and ideas so eloquently presented. Mr. Abotsi, Dr. Abotsi. It was an exciting and engaging presentation, pitched at a level you'd expect from a public lecture on a topic like this, and one that is being streamed all across Ghana. Other than a few Latin words, most people, including my 8-year-old adorable son, and the man, or indeed woman, on the Kaneshi to Kaswa Trotro, would have been able to grasp at least the key essence of the presentation. At the heart of Dr. Abotsi's submission is a question: what kind of nation do we, me, you, others outside this room, do we want for ourselves, our children, grandchildren, and generations unborn? This question is not only for government and its appointees, or the likes of Imani, IEA, CDD, the Ghana Bar, the academic set, etc. It's a question for me, it's a question for you. It's a question for those who are not in the room, listening on Joy 99.7 FM and watching on Joy TV. As Dean Abotsi points out, elections cannot and must not be the mainstay of our democracy. It takes a lot more. Our presence in this room, and it's a really impressive packed audience, Our presence in this room reminds me of some lines in Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, and I quote, "A man who calls his kinsmen to a feast does not do so, I beg your pardon. A man who calls his kinsmen to a feast does not do so to save them from starving. They all have food in their own homes. When we gather together in the moonlit village ground, it is not because of the moon. Every man can see it in his own compound. We come together because it is good for kinsmen to do so. It's a pleasure to have been asked to chair this gathering of kinsmen and kinswomen to reflect on such an important topic, our 1992 Constitution, and the question of elections, citizenship, public goods delivery, and inclusive government. Please allow me to indulge myself by sharing a little bit about why this topic matters so much to me and the different groups to which I represent. I stand before you, firstly, as a proud Ghanaian. Secondly, with my strong tribal roots from way up on Cape St. Paul's, more commonly known as Away in the Vota region, and from Dewu Ikropong in the Eastern region. And finally, I stand before you as a Pan-Africanist who is both frustrated and excited by what Africa is and could be. I have never hidden these facts, which I consider core to my identity and values. And I wear proudly my Igbe names, even if some consider them to be a mouthful. I've now forgotten my irritation whilst at Ashimoto School on the first day of term when the housemaster, in taking roll call, stopped my name and said, meaning, what sort of name is that when I pronounce, my nose begins to itch? And at Oxford University, where I had the privilege of having 73 delightful years, I resisted the temptation to anglicize my name. One of my friends, who was called Obianho, whatever it was, Siao, because he had a mother from Nigeria and a Ghanaian father, proceeded to call himself Obed Shaw. So Siao to Shaw, I don't know what. Last Thursday, though, I had to bow my head in shame, literally, when I saw those images of a few of our parliamentarians acting so, forgive my language, barbaric. As if it was not bad enough, on each of the several Zoom and Microsoft Teams meetings I attended that day, and many emails and WhatsApp messages that I received and continue to receive from around the world, I was asked about the shocking images going fast and furious around the world. The climax of my embarrassment was when my teenage nephew asked me about the clip. What moral authority do I now have to continue to insist that disputes are resolved by the mouth and not the fist? I do hope the full might of the relevant rules are applied to those behind this to set a precedent that our dignity of parliament is never made to stoop so low. I'm also saddened, although highly enlightened, by the verdict, perhaps damning verdict, delivered this morning. Sleeping and disengaged citizens who have not as yet, at least the vast majority, heeded the president's call to be citizens and not spectators. Poor delivery of public goods, the entrenchment of the winner-takes-all syndrome, and the creeping influence of the shadow constitution. I need not tell you, and I'm sure you saw on your drive here and you'll see on your drive back, that our streets are filled with students begging day and night. Communities struggle with water, sanitation, and health. The quality of education, free or not free, is deeply troubling. Many struggle to make a living. Crimes and murders committed in broad daylight remain unresolved. The culture of violence and vigilantism is becoming acceptable even at the highest level. Despite all the talk, corruption is still very much on the rise. It's also clear from the morning lecture that the spirit of the Constitution is being stifled by the distorted application of its provisions. The slow but creeping influence of the shadow constitution. As brilliant as Dr. Abotzi's lecture was, I was hoping that he would shed a bit more light on the unfortunate situation, which is the day-to-day reality of many Ghanaians, where with the full backing of the law, families, and the police service, we use both the shadow constitution and opportunistically interpret certain laws of the land to discriminate, even perhaps suppress those who don't easily fit within the boxes that society has imposed on us. Without limitation, these include the mentally ill, the physically disabled, those with different sexual orientation, or the non-binary. In some instances, we rally behind the cloak of religion to conduct terrible acts, depending on the time, the place, the actors. Again, even when it comes to women, the young, the aged, we do see unacceptable levels of discrimination. I'm no constitutional scholar and do not aspire to be one. And I say that by disclaimer because I see that there's a conversation after. I'm not here as a constitutional scholar. I'm here as a business lawyer who applies certain aspects of constitutional work that I do. And despite my mother's lifelong efforts, I do not understand the Bible as much as I would like to. But this I do know, and I certainly do know this, and firmly believe that the good book enjoins us first to love our brothers and sisters as we love ourselves, and to remove the log of wood from our eyes before attempting to remove the speck of dust from the eyes of others. Perhaps Dr. Abotsi has no intention to begin to court controversy so early in the year, especially since the list of ministers and board members have not yet been released. I would like to end my remarks with a poem that used to be in the Ghana Basic School English textbook titled, Look to Yourself. For all things, look to yourself first. You have all things and you never thirst. Your land has many things, great and good. Resources, minerals, and other things. Do not go to a friend cap in hand. Honey and milk flow in your hands. Don't say the grass is green at their feet. For the grass is greener at your feet. You have got all the richest gifts. Others don't have half your gifts. Look to yourself, then use all that you have and be great. Look to yourselves, reflect on this lecture, heed the President's call to action to be citizens and not spectators. In a lot of ways, this is what the Constitution requires of us. If you don't remember anything about this lecture, other than perhaps the item 13, which I don't even know whether it's available, please let us all remember that the grass is not green on the other side. It is green where you water it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
You can have a seat. Thank you very much, Elikem Nuti Fafa Kwenye here. Fortunately, my nostrils are intact. We're going to have a quick conversation, and to be honest with you, I feel totally out of depth. These are two very bright minds, and it's a rare privilege to be having a conversation with them. And I think that at this point, I will fall on the age-old wisdom that man, know thyself, and open the floor very quickly so that we can engage with the audience here and those of you at home who would like to share with us your thoughts via social media. Kofi, very, very insightful questions and things that I feel. I've been very troubled by it, but I've never thought that there was hope. And I think that what you start, and the questions that you've asked do present us with an opportunity that I think shines a bit of a glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel for us in this dispensation. But I'd like to start by asking you whether, or rather, I'll start with Elikem on this. Now, you both agree that there has to be some change and the work will have to be done by everyone, citizens. But we often feel helpless, you know. Where do we start? Is it a chicken and egg situation? Are we able to impact this change bottom up, or we wait for another constitutional review commission and a white paper to follow that, and hopefully someone actually acts on it?
Okay, there's a video clip. If you Google, I think if you put TED Talks, Simon. Okay, just with lollipop moments of leadership, right? The whole point of that clip is to say that when we think of leadership, we think of Nana Addo Dankwa, MPs and all of that. And there's a story about this guy who was first year of university in the queue for orientation. And there's this girl who was so scared about going home, being in the university, leaving her parents. And he basically started acting like a fool and gave her a lollipop. It turned out many years later they got married. The point of it, and that was leadership. The point is that you don't need, everybody is a leader. You know, so we influence people in different ways, right? I'm not a politician by the convention, but I consider myself a politician in a little fields of endeavor that I have a little control over. So I think that's how I am as helpless as you are. Other than the board of SIGA, where I do have a voice, I'm an ordinary citizen like you, but I am not a spectator, and I am a citizen. Okay,
thanks very much. Kofi, you talked about the importance of endurance, but everywhere you turn...
So I beg your pardon, I'm a citizen, not a spectator.
Oh, sorry. So,
I just realized what I said.
All right. There's a certain level of cynicism and skepticism. But then in your quote of Abraham Lincoln, there's clearly proven results that democracy is a long journey, and over time it evolves. That requires endurance. Are we being cynical and impatient, or you think that that call is as aptly placed today?
Well, we can't ignore the fact that we live in a fast-paced world. Everything is a fast track, you know, fast food, fast that, fast this. So it's difficult for anyone to wait for the next generation. We want changes now. But as you mentioned, institutions change over time, both culturally and substantively. But the point is this: you asked the question earlier, and to go back on the question earlier on what needs to change and where do we start. The Constitution, in my own estimation, my very humble estimation, the Constitution is 95% okay. Few problems, and the few ones you can list them, and some have been mentioned. For example, ministers who are members of parliament. Everybody sees problems with that. And part of the reason there are problems with that is because ministerial work is full-time. Parliamentary work is full-time. And make no mistake, those who speak of the British comparison, the British are stuck with their parliamentary system because of tradition. It's mainly tradition, not the essence of it. And their government is in parliament, by the way. So for theirs, when the minister is in parliament, he's in government. The prime minister himself is in parliament. So for the British, there's a sense in which cabinet moves from 10 Downing Street to Parliament House. And that's parliamentary/government business. And then moves from there back to 10 Downing Street. Ours is not like that. In ours, the minister will be on the floor in Parliament, and probably the president needs him urgently. And a call, text, notification comes to the minister. You should report to Jubilee House immediately. I guarantee you, 90% he is likely to go to Jubilee House. His parliamentary function immediately is distorted. There's a case for an amendment of that provision dealing with that. There was an original history behind that. I think, by and large, we've all understood that somehow that purpose can be, you know, we can amend it without destroying the Constitution. So that one I can understand. What I can't understand is Article 108. Article 108 says, no bill shall be considered in Parliament which imposes a charge on the Consolidated Fund unless it is accompanied, or rather unless it is introduced by the President, by or on behalf of the President. Parliament has decided itself, and that's the shocking part. Parliament itself, this is not by the executive. Parliament itself has decided to give that interpretation a broader meaning that restricts Parliament itself. And so, for example, one thing that people haven't realized is that Parliament has become financially dependent on the executive. They're always complaining, and it shocks me. I don't get it. You know, like your father has given everything to you, and you still complain. You want the thing he's giving you. I'm sure you can imagine how angry your father will be. So Parliament complains about we don't have houses, we don't have this, we don't have that. But Parliament's financial autonomy is contained under Article 108. Parliament's own ability to pass rules and regulations that regulate its own internal financial administration. But it's giving everything to the President or the executive. And so because of that, unless the executive has introduced any bill, even a bill to ban, say, trocosi in the Volta region, under 108, you can't, because the interpretation has been given to give the impression that only the executive can introduce legislation. So a lot of the provisions in there, if you look at the spirit once again, the spirit being the policy, there's no text without spirit. Mm-hmm. Each of the text has a policy. So go back into the foundational and find out why a particular text is the way it is. You will realize that a chunk of them are being applied out of context. And that out of context is hurting institutions, it's hurting bodies, it's hurting individuals who are the intendment, among others. And that's why I think that some changes have to happen. There are very few. The chunk of it can evolve with time. But that evolvement has to start with commitment. In the absence of commitment, forget it.
Okay. All right. Let me go into the hall now and take some questions. Okay. I'll need a microphone on the floor. Okay, there's one right there. Oh, the mic will come to you.
I think the constitution here is being overruled. We have a shadow constitution.
Yes.
I am the chairman of this function, so I should be taking over into the moderation of the. That of course gets me out of answering the questions on the constitution because so, madam, please tell us your name and where you're coming from.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I just wanted to make a very quick comment before running out. My name is Golda Ado. Very well vested in the issues of this country. I think the entire program has been very orgasmatic. I very much would like to have a copy of the speech because it's something I would really like to dig in. But I wanted to point out that you made a point in closing, Dr. Abotsi, that in my limited legal knowledge, I have a question about, and that is if you feel that we need to focus more on the actors and the change of attitudes from that perspective, knowing the kind of country we're in, what guarantee do we have that in the absence of some updated document, they would still behave themselves and do what they have to do? I think it's been a free-for-all, even in the presence of a document. So I don't know if we should really discard the notion of updating our constitution to what it needs to be, so that we can at least have some anchor upon which the attitudes and mindsets will function. I used to teach critical thinking and logical reasoning in some of the universities, and one of them was here, and I taught level 100 law students. And majority of our young people who we claim we're educating are actually foundationless. They're a mass of insecurities and anxieties and frustrations and very empty bases where we've not really given them much to anchor themselves on. And I think that we need to be looking at that in addition to the fact that we really do not have a country. What we have is a space where people decide their allegiances to political parties, and then we decide to do what we want. We don't have a country where if the foreigners take their monies away, we can do nothing on our own. So I think that the constitution very much needs to at least be put there, even if ceremonially, And that's all I wanted to both say and ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I kindly ask, we only have about 30 minutes, that you ask a question. No comments, please, with due respect. You did not know, so I'll allow you that. I don't want to set a precedent because we have a full house where Abotsi is available to answer more questions. So thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you.
So should we do 3 and then we take 3 questions and then we I think Dr. Sakara is next. So no, please. Okay. Was next. And then okay.
Yeah, my name is Kofi Krojesin, Volta Development Foundation and Forum. I want to know and find out, are we not too critical on ourselves as far as the constitution is concerned? Ghana is only 28 years old by this constitution. Both NDC and NPP parties were promulgated or registered on 28 July 1993. So only 28 years old. Now, if you look at the 3 leaders of this country, President Akufo-Addo, President Mahama, and Bawumia, their parents are all politicians. So the 3 of them, President Mahama, President Akufo-Addo, they went to Parliament for the same day, they exited the same day. So the critical thinking that they all have probably has gone out to probably beyond the Constitution and also the registration of these 2 parties. So now, talking about Parliament, all those young men who were in Parliament, whom we are calling parliamentarians today, coming from Kenya here and all of them, they are your colleagues, who were trained from these universities as well, so have those critical mindset from this school. So I think that for me, looking at this school, it seems to me that we are too critical on ourselves, allow the constitution to mature, allow Ghana to grow, allow the mindset to grow, so that we can be able to leapfrog. Because I presume that probably by 2024, when all these things, maybe there will have been an exit for the old mindset to replace by the new set. So are we not too critical on ourselves?
Okay. So the question is, are we not too critical?
Right.
Yeah.
So last, but before I do that, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of the Pro-Vice Chancellor of the UPSA, Dr. Bano. Right. Welcome very much. Welcome. And we are glad to be your guests here.
Okay. So Dr. Abu Sakara Foster, right at the front.
After that, we'll answer the questions and we'll go back to another 3.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Dr. Abotsi on the very excellent presentation, and I enjoyed it very much. However, I find a contradiction in the statement that the Constitution is a living document. It's not a perfect document, but it doesn't need review. That's the contradiction I find. It does not need review.
Okay.
And I think that we need to make a distinction between reforms, reviews in the magnitude that he's imagining it for people to better understand it. That was one main issue I had. But I think I have to put it in another context for a broader audience to understand it. This is our 4th constitution. So what brought about the other 3 constitutions? And how are we sure that without review, we will not have a 5th constitution? That is a very important point, because when you get to a point where political parties hijack the state, the same frustrations that brought about the demise of the other 3 can bring about the demise of this one. And I don't think that we should take that very lightly. Thank you.
Thank you. We just allow a 4th question and we'll go to answers.
Okay, mine will be very quick. My name is Professor Kwao from the UPSC Law School.
Okay.
I tend to side with the... yes. Don't you think that citizenship is a work in progress? Looking back with the benefit of hindsight, I tend to believe that Ghanaian citizens have evolved. When you listen to questions or the speeches by the common Ghanaian, there is a difference in the understanding of the Constitution now than under prior Constitution. So my question to Dean Abotsi, excellent presentation, by the way. Don't you think, as you said, we're being too critical and that citizenship, active citizenship, is something that is a work in progress? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just make some brief remarks in relation to the question I think Dr. Klugeson asked, which you echoed, and I'll hand over to our constitutional law expert. And for the avoidance of doubt, I'm not a constitutional law expert. Anyway, I will be critical. I mean, the accounts have a saying, "Agrobesoa if you're not pa," right? There's a sense to, I think it's important that we, first of all, aspire to the highest standard possible, right? And allow ourselves room to, make mistakes and learn and so on. To be fair to Dr. Abotsi, he did say that about 95% of the Constitution is right. And I think that, he's compared it, he's a constitutional scholar, he's compared it to other constitutions around the world, etc., and put it in a local context. And so, having put that, so the document itself seems, good enough. Then there's the actors and the institutions, and that's where the problem is. So it's important that we hold those actors and institutions to a higher standard. And you mentioned the point about my friend from the law school about how the Ghanaian system has evolved. When you take Uber or Trotro, those of us who do, you would hear conversations that honestly 10 years ago you didn't have. Why? Because we're an active media in all kinds of languages. And if we do not aspire to a higher standard, if you ask my friend here, he's at Joy FM, but his standard is probably BBC News. So, but if we just said, oh, I had there, because the problem we have in Ghana there, yeah, or whatever, we tend to quickly aspire to very low standards. So I firmly believe that much as the Constitution is good enough, we have to be so critical of the people that implement it, even ourselves as citizens or spectators. I'll hand over to Dr. Abotsi now.
Taking over from there, I think Eric can you justice. So the question of being too critical, the unexamined life is not worth living. And let's be clear. People have made a comparison between Ghana and America, and it's very common. So America is 400 years old, and we should not compare ourselves to them. That is true. But where we also fail to pay attention to is the fact that America didn't have the benefit of example. We have the benefit of example. In other words, had the benefit of knowing where they fell short. One of the examples, and I'll tell you what, one of the examples is this. America didn't have, if you look at the American Constitution, it doesn't have any provision on judicial review. So the American Supreme Court created judicial review. They didn't have it. It was a big contest. In fact, in their very first case that decided judicial review, they wanted to order the president to do something, but they were worried because President Jefferson at that time, he was a military guy and he was a president, he became president. They knew that he would ignore them. Because at that time, there were no presidents. So he would just say, who are you, a court, to tell me, head of state, not to do something? So to avoid that, they told him, we can order you, but we won't order you. It's almost like someone telling someone, I can beat you up, but I won't touch you. Because he knows the danger of touching you. So I'm just saying that they did not have the benefit of experience and the benefit of example. We have. So the business of not having to reinvent the wheel is there. Literally, we can look at the examples of many countries and tweak them to our own circumstances. And so being too critical, I understand you, Dr. Klugeson and Prof Kwao, I understand your concerns on that maybe we should focus a bit more on our own gains. And I did mention that, but I did not spend time on those. I said we have had many elections, we have established institutions, we have had peace, several regions in turmoil. We've done a few good things, but it's almost being too happy with little. And I think that in the circumstances of things, I would rather we focus on what we could have done in 30 years with all the example around us. And I think there's so much we could have done, which we haven't done. Nonetheless, I know why you're saying that, because Dr. Klugeson, you and I talk a lot, and I know you have a few concerns in this respect. The conclusion, the recommendation the lady asked of, to be honest, as I was thinking of what recommendations to make, I realized that there's very little recommendation to make. Because for a near-perfect document, for a document which is really good, there's very little to change. The problem, to be honest, go and look at the Constitution again. The problem with the Constitution is the actor factor. The actor factor, the one who is in charge of either Parliament, the executive, even the judiciary, the actor factor. The Constitution is a brilliant document. Our Constitution is about 3 to 4 times denser than the American Constitution. And the American Constitution is hardly tinkered with. I'm not saying we should always look at America and do something. No, in fact, these days, I'm not sure that's the best example. But, you know, you know, they act, well, they are, exactly. In fact, in the case of America, they also have acta facta. No, and that's one thing. We have underestimated the impact of the acta when it comes to the Constitution. We have tended to rather overestimate the impact of the text. And the essence of the lecture is to draw attention to that dynamic and to let you know that within that fray and that dynamic, the text is weak, the actor is strong. So rather get a good actor who will deal with the text, which essentially is okay. We rather tend to focus on the text, change the text. I guarantee you, change the text today, by tomorrow it's already outmoded. The actor would have found something. And the last one here, the living constitution, just make it quickly. The living constitution. Dr. Sakara, I thought, on the contrary, the point about the living constitution is the reason why minimal changes need to be made. Because the essence of a living constitution is that the constitution adapts with time. In fact, in the whole space of legal jurisprudence, the only thing which is referred to as living is the constitution. Every other law essentially is dead. It's dead because it has to change after a certain time. But normally constitutions are seen as living, and the reason is because of the philosophy that I mentioned, that constitutions are transgenerational. And because they are transgenerational, the understanding is that invariably constitutions will have to live with the time by growing. Otherwise, the constitution will become outmoded. And let's be honest, all those who are alive in 1992, when the constitution was enacted, let me make it, you know, by the year 2120, let me give a long time. I'm sure by that time, everybody who was alive in 1992 would have been dead. What it means is that by that time, we would have imposed our will on a future which never was when we adopted it. So it's time.
It is. But I'm going to ask 2 more questions. And if you could be very brief. Don't worry, we'll continue. Just the problem is that we are with Joy FM. They've got to go for midday news. So we'll have the conversation afterwards. We'll continue the conversation. So Dr. Agri Darko, and there's a man whose eyes are, or maybe he's left. Okay, he has left. There's another guy. There's another guy. So okay, just Dr. Agri Darko, and then we'll sort of take it. Don't worry, we'll come to you guys.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Brilliant exposition of constitutionalism by Dr. Abotsi. I think you've lived up to expectation. The expectation was that we were going to deliver, and so I'm impressed. So you've delivered. But quick things, two major things. One would be that a living document must also necessarily reflect the changing circumstances. And I was thinking that the amendment procedures, etc., that are provided for in the Constitution will be one way by which we ensure that the Constitution becomes a living document. Maybe how far-reaching the reforms are will be something that you may want to reflect on. Then the issue of being the Chief Director of the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs, Parliament appeared a number of times. I'm sure the presentation was not dealing with the causes of the problems, but looking at what the problems are in the first place. But I have seen a tension between the functions that we have given to our Parliament. For instance, we are looking at the key representation, legislation, oversight. Then we are vis-a-vis the constituency surgeries that they have to undertake. And you see that we seem to be gravitating more towards their constituency surgeries. And so you sit in Accra and your employers are in your constituency. And for me, we need to be able to find a way of dealing with it from the political party's perspective and then the perspective of maybe Parliament itself. And then the last one will be just an addition that in July this and last year, a motion was adopted by our Parliament to deal with the debilitating effect of Article 108 that you alluded to in your presentation. That now Parliament is emboldened to now adopt private members. In fact, they have passed one already, and more will be in the pipeline. For me, it's an indication that private members, other than ministers of state, will have the opportunity to put certain critical issues on the public agenda, in line with your suggestion that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is something that exists in the UK, even though only 5% of those get onto the legislation they nonetheless succeed in putting critical issues on public agenda for subsequently government to undertake. Thank you very much.
Great question and a great comment. Because we're about to get off air. So.
Right, so I'm taking over for a moment. I'd like to thank all our audience on both radio and TV and on social media for joining us for this all-important discussion. We will be bringing you excerpts of this in subsequent playbacks and also on social media. But we're going off now. Stay tuned in on radio for the midday news as well as on TV, and regular programming will follow immediately after the news. Thank you.
Thank you.